Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Alex, he's Tucker, and today we are going to be doing a liquored list for Paranormal Activity franchise. So we're going to be starting at the very bottom, working our way up to number 1. So let's get right into it. Tucker, what did you get for number 7, or worst movie in the franchise?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the worst movie in the franchise at number 7 is Paranormal Activity 4.
I kind of figured you were going to say that.
Well, yeah, based on our episode on number 6, I kind of gave it away a little bit, but...
Yeah, based on our episode on number 6, mine is number 6.
Yeah, and I knew that was coming for sure.
Yeah.
I guess you talk about 6 first. I mean... I guess it's worth saying for me that my number 6 is number 6.
Yeah.
So the next one on my list.
And it's exact same with me. My number 6 is number 4.
So we'll talk about the ghost dimension first, because I feel like that's more commonly the lowest of the lists for most people. That's a popular opinion, I guess.
I looked online. I usually make my list, then look at other people's lists, see how it compares.
Yeah.
And I know that ghost dimension's at basically the bottom of very many of them, if not all of them.
Yeah.
Ghost Dimension's one of the worst movies in the franchise. I feel like that can't be understated enough. I feel like everything the fourth one does bad, the sixth one does worse. Such as like the stupid gimmick. The characters are just the worst. Or just a few things I'm thinking of off the top of my head. But I did not like number 6 at all.
And that's fair. And I didn't like it either. But I will say that there were a few things that intrigued me a little bit. Like, I was a little bit more entertained by what was going on because of certain things. For example, like, I was intrigued by the camera at first, how it was showing the particles. It wasn't anything straight in your face at first. And then all of a sudden, they just immediately ramp it up to show you the entity full on. Like, you get to see Toby, what he looks like completely. And they just completely ruined any effect that they could have kept a little bit more mysterious, and I would have enjoyed it more. But at the beginning, I thought the effect was kind of neat. It's something different. It was a little gimmicky, like you said, but it was at least something that it piqued my interest a little bit because it was different, I guess. That being said, the dialogue was ridiculous in these movies too.
Yeah.
Rather than or in the 6th movie, I should say. I feel like the dialogue, they kind of were just describing exactly what was going on. Like, they were showing you what happened and then immediately describing it by using their words. It's like, why are you telling us and showing us? Do one or the other. And for me, it was just, I don't know. It was a little bit too on the nose, I guess, the dialogue.
Well, it's just like, what? She's describing Leela's room. Like, no shit. Did you not know what that room looks like? He's describing us. That's us. That's us, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that.
It's a bad, bad movie.
And I guess going off on that one specific scene you're talking about where Christy is describing their room current day, I think that could have been pretty interesting to see them describing the future, what it was looking like, and what the current family's going through. I feel like that was kind of an interesting idea where it looked like she was watching them walk out of the room on the footage. Like, that whole concept I felt like was kind of interesting. But they didn't execute it well because I guess the dialogue played a role, and there's just no suspense in the movie. I don't know. Yeah. They could have just executed a lot better, I feel like.
Oh yeah. No, they basically they took 5 writers to try to sabotage the franchise.
And that's probably what happened. It's just a lot of clashing going on.
Yeah.
5 writers for one movie.
Yeah, so they showed Toby way too much, so they tried to take away him being scary, anything like that. And on top of that, Christy basically doesn't mean anything really now. Their whole backstory, movies 1 through 4, are basically kicked to the curb. Nobody cares about them anymore because I guess they're evil now, something like that.
Yeah.
Super fucking stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think the 6th one, the storyline is so much more convoluted and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But for me, I guess we'll go into the 4th one now.
Yeah.
For me, the 4th one, the reason why I ranked it lower is just because I was so fucking bored the whole time. I was not entertained 1 second in that film. And the main reason for that is because, like we mentioned in all of our episodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, they just copied and pasted 4 movies in a row. Some of them were done a lot better than others. But by the 4th one, I was just so sick of it and just wanted the franchise to end at that point. And then they tried something new and kind of brought it back up for me.
Yeah.
But that's why I ranked 4th one in last place for me, because I just didn't get an ounce of entertainment from it.
Yeah. See, my problem is they tried to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 was the low point, and then they made 6. And they just basically tried to make 4 worse, in my opinion anyways. Like, basically 20 minutes in the film, I checked out of 6.
Yeah.
6 was that bad for me. 4, I was, like, mildly, like, still kind of interested in. Like, there was a little bit more, like, the boyfriends, and, like, I kind of wanted to see where, like, the 2 kids would go. But, like, I didn't like the movie by any means.
No. Well, obviously, if it's that far down in your list. For me, like I said, the characters in both 6 and 4 were bad. But for 4, it was just, they were bland. They didn't need to be there. I didn't care. Same thing goes with 6. They were all bland. Skylar especially didn't need to be there. Like, they didn't really have a role. But also, at least the first 3 Paranormal Activities offered slight changes to mix it up a little bit and introduce something new. But in Paranormal Activity 4, I feel like the only thing they introduced new was the Xbox Kinect gimmick, which I wasn't the biggest fan of. And other than that, they just copied everything from the other movies. Like, even some of the jump scares, like the chandeliers moving and then dropping, that was done in the previous installment. Why are you doing it again?
Yeah.
So things like that just made it more irritating for me personally. And yeah, that's just long and short of it, why I ranked it lower than 6.
Yeah. Should we move on to number 5?
Yep, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is Paranormal Activity, the marked ones.
Okay, mine is not the marked ones.
Okay, what's yours?
Next of Kin.
Next of Kin, okay.
I'll let you talk about the marked ones. That one's a bit higher on my list, so we'll come back to that one for me.
Yeah, so the marked ones, like, the marked ones wasn't bad. It was definitely a fresh take on Paranormal Activity. For the most part, I liked how they tried to go into more storylines as opposed to just sticking with Katie and Christy. They kind of tried to go into, like, the whole cult thing, how it's kind of like a global thing for the most part. It's not just this family it's happening to. It's happening to a lot of people.
Exactly.
So, yeah, no, for what it's worth, I did enjoy the movie for the most part.
Yeah, and I'll talk about what I thought about it a little bit higher. I don't want to get into what number it is yet, just because it's higher up on my list than yours. But mine, number 5 is Next of Kin, like we mentioned. I don't know, I just kind of felt like it was a little bit boring. Like, they did do things to get my engagement up. So, like, this one wasn't a bad movie by any means. It was okay. It was just middle of the road, like I said in our episode of it. But, I just found myself getting boring at times. I will say I did like how they tried something new, but at the same time I felt like some of the paranormal stuff was just forced, and they kind of did that just to put a Paranormal Activity label on it, and I wish they would have just kind of, kept it an original title and, just tried it that way. I know I mentioned in our episode how if they would have just stuck to how this cult is like a fake Amish community and Margot goes there to try and find out more information about her mother and just delved into that completely without any of the paranormal stuff, I think I would have enjoyed it more. But yeah, I don't know, I just found myself getting bored at times with it, I guess. And one thing in particular that stood out to me that was a little bit distracting at times, at most times I'd say, is the creature, Sarah. I don't know, the demon, Sarah, whatever you call her.
Asmodeus, I think it was.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I feel like she just looked like a taller golem.
Oh yeah, no, and like the creature looked bad, but like it reminds me a lot of Slender the Arrival or like any of those horror video games.
Yeah.
A lot of the creatures look silly, but it's more or less the fear of being chased around and like this thing's going to murder the shit out of you.
Yeah, and I get that, but for me it just kind of took me out of the whole movie when I saw it, because it was literally even running like Gollum or Schmeagol or whatever, and it just like I literally burst out laughing because I saw that and I was like, ha, it's Schmeagol. And it just kind of distracted me for a bit. It's just a little bit of a nitpick. I mean, I wish the creature looked a little bit cooler, I guess I'll say. I don't know. I didn't like the way it was designed, that's all.
Okay, moving on to number 4 then?
Yeah, so we'll move on to number 4 now.
And I feel like this is where our lists are going to dramatically change for sure. So my number 4 is, we might be the same on this one, but my number 4 is Paranormal Activity, the first one.
No. not the same for me.
Not the same. Kind of figured. Yeah.
Number 4 for me is Activity 2.
Okay.
I feel like you saying Paranormal Activity, the first one, as number 4 is a pretty unpopular opinion.
For the most part, like, if you take it with a grain of salt, they're all the same movies, right?
Well, yeah, that's another thing, especially for the first 3, I'd say. You can kind of toss them around and, pick one at random and be about the same. There's just minor things that pick them apart for me. For me, for number 2, I guess I'll talk about why number 2 is number 4 for me.
Oh,
the second one is number 4
Confused
for me.
me there for a second. Yeah, well, we can talk about number 2 here first if you want.
Yeah, so for me, it ranks lower than the first one immediately because it's just the same movie repeating. There's more characters, that's the main change that happened, but the overall tone and everything is the exact same. And again, it was a criticism I had for Paranormal Activity 4, how they copied jump scares. This one copied the first movie with Christy being dragged out of the room and down the stairs, which Katie was dragged down in the first one, so why are you repeating the same kind of
Doing
scares?
the exact same thing with Christy, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just kind of things like that. It makes it go down a couple notches for me because, it's one thing to try and capture the same tone, but to just make it look and feel the exact same way, and it just feels like it's it is a continuation. Well, it's technically going into the past, I guess, so it's a reverse continuation. Yeah. But I don't know, it just felt bland and it didn't have as much life as the first one, for me at least. And yeah, I don't know, I just don't have a lot to say about it because it's so similar to the first one.
Yeah, I have it a little bit higher up just because it's a little bit more sentimental to myself, but we'll get to that. But the main reason why I liked the second one, or I guess all the other ones up to this point over the first one, is the first one, I feel like it's very plain original, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there's not a lot to really grab onto within the movie. There was Mika, and that's really about it. Him being a dumbass, and that's kind of the thing that I really grabbed a hold on to. I just kind of hated him.
That's fair.
And it's really hard to explain, but I just like the atmosphere for all the other movies so much more, if that even makes sense.
Yeah, I guess. And especially because the first one had such a small budget, it feels like a little bit amateurish.
Yeah.
And the other ones later on, of course, have huge budgets, so it's a lot more polished and fine-tuned a little bit. So that probably plays a part as well for your opinion on the first one. For me, it doesn't hinder the first one by any means. And in fact, it might help it in my eyes just because it is a found footage film. But we'll get into the first one for me because, again, that one's a little higher on the list.
The other reason why I didn't like it as much as some of the other ones is because it felt like it was very confined to one room and only one room. Whereas a lot of the other ones you could see, for example, Katie's and Christie's playroom, or what's the other example I had? The living area, the kitchen for Paranormal Activity 2, Hunter's room. You can see a lot more in Paranormal Activities 2 and 3. And I feel it doesn't like the camera work the way that was set up a lot more.
Yeah, and that's because they had more cameras, and in the first one they just had
had more budget, and that's the thing. I can't really fault them for having a low budget in Paranormal Activity 1. Yeah. But I liked the other movies because they did have more of a budget.
Yeah, and that's fair. So should we move on to number 3, are we at? Yes, number 3. So number 3 for me, this is where the marked ones comes into play. I'll go into this because you already did, and then we'll get to your number 3. But honestly, the main thing about this one is they finally did something different, and it wasn't just the same formula copied and pasted.
Copied and pasted a million times,
and that, for this franchise, is a huge bonus in my eyes, honestly. That's why it's my number 3. It's because it's something unique and different. It still had the paranormal elements like we see in the previous ones. It's still that same sort of tone with the paranormal activity that's going on, but it's a different storyline. It's involving a different part of the world even. It didn't just take place in the same household or the same family, or it doesn't involve all the same people. It's a completely new demographic, so I like that as well. And also, for the first, it wasn't the first time, but I guess I watched this right after watching Paranormal Activity 4, where the characters were just so bland, I didn't care for any of them. And then we come into this one where pretty much every character has their own personality. They're like, they're kind of, you can differentiate them.
They're like goofballs.
And they're full of life to me.
Yeah.
So it makes me more invested in them as characters and like more interested in them, especially like Jesse and Hector's relationship. I feel like that dynamic worked out decently well.
Yeah.
And obviously this isn't a perfect film. I'm not going to say anything like that. It had its flaws. Like, I feel like Paranormal Activity 6 got the idea of the ghost dimension from this one even.
Oh yeah, because of all the mirrors, and we can go back in time and have
stuff like that.
Go to cursed places or something.
And like even the shot where Jesse is just bursting out of, he's like teleporting into the room almost.
Yeah.
That is another thing that you might see in Paranormal Activity 6. So like, I feel like it was the start of something ridiculous with the ghost cameras and the portals and stuff like that. So that, I didn't like that aspect of the marked ones, but I feel like that was just outshined from the rest of the story and characters being told, I guess.
Mm-hmm. My number 3 is Paranormal Activity 3.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my number 2. I'll let you talk about it first.
Yeah. So Paranormal Activity 3. The main reason why I liked it more than Paranormal Activity 1, there was a lot more going on. I liked Dennis a lot more than the other male protagonist being Mika, if I want to compare it to the first one anyways. Mm-hmm. I felt like there was a strong dynamic. I liked Randy. The kids were good. I feel like a lot of it was just done super well, in my opinion. I feel like it kind of tried to perfect a lot of the other Paranormal Activity movies, even though obviously number 2 is higher on the list for me. But it definitely tried to perfect a lot of things. It did a lot of things right. It made me guessing a lot. It didn't really come to any good conclusion, in my opinion. I feel like the ending was really rushed. I still think that now, as I thought that in theaters, but the ending was very rushed. That's kind of the only thing holding it back, I think.
That's something that we differentiate on, actually. And that's one of my points as to why it's my number 2.
Okay.
Is the ending is what bumped it up a notch for me, because I was interested in like Grandma Lois's involvement and that whole cult aspect. It kind of gave us more backstory on the demon or whatever that was haunting them.
Yeah.
Like they go back, this is another prequel, so they go back in time and it's already explained as they were kids, so I don't know why they didn't know about it in the future installments, but that's besides the point. I do agree with you that it did feel a little bit rushed and that they would have spent a little bit more time on it. It would have been nice, but I still did like the whole concept and idea of that, and the way it was executed was relatively pleasing for me, at least. I liked it. So that was just something that we differed opinions on, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like they go to Grandma Lois's house, and then after that, I feel like within 10 seconds, everyone's just kind of dead and the movie's over. I really wish they could have marinated it a little bit more, like spend a few nights at Grandma Lois's house and been like, oh, this is spooky. I saw Grandma Lois doing this last night. Are you sure she's all like right in the head kind of thing? Or like, oh, Toby followed us. But I feel like they just had like one night and killed everybody off, and that was the end of the movie.
That's true.
Other than that, like if the movie, I feel like if the ending was done a little bit more, like they added maybe an extra like 10 minutes, some more nights on at the very end, I would have liked this movie a lot more.
That's fair.
It didn't really explain anything besides Grandma Lois like being a part of the cult, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. For me, I liked, like, the reason why I have it as number 2 is because of the overall backstory that they give us. Like, they give us backstory on Christy and Katie as they were kids growing up. I like that aspect of it. I feel like the kid actors for that did a pretty good job too, given what they had to work with, I guess. Like, they're acting in front of a fake ghost, so I think they did pretty decent in that. And just like the backstory with how Toby was originated, I liked that as well. Didn't go into too much detail with it, like you mentioned. That's why it was a fault for you, but it didn't take it down any notches for me in that regard. I just enjoyed it because of the backstory and this overall story provided, and I just liked the characters involved too. Like even the adults were a lot more fun. Like you had Dennis and Randy.
They were a lot more full of life in this installment compared to almost every other one.
Yeah, and that's just something that I really enjoyed about it as well. So that's just why it's my number 2.
Yeah. We'll move on to my number 2 now, which still might shock you. It's Paranormal Activity 2 is my number 2.
Okay. Yeah.
So Paranormal Activity 2, it's a little bit sentimental to me. I think it was the first one that I really watched, and I liked it, I'd say the most out of the original 3, which I'd say are most people's top 3 for the most part, or at least commonly regarded.
Yeah.
The one thing that I liked about this movie is all the characters were subtly trying to avoid like the ghosts. So for example, the father was constantly in denial, trying to find every excuse in the book to say like, hey, this thing doesn't exist. Like he goes out of the way to prove the pool cleaner can jump out of the pool on its own.
Yeah.
So he goes through like extreme lengths, or even when Katie tells Christy like, hey, you should just not talk about the past and then it won't show up. And then some dramatic thing happens to Christy and then she's just like, yeah, nothing happened, I'm fine. So they all try to suppress it until it becomes too strong, and then once it becomes too strong, then they have to do something about it. Yeah. Meanwhile, the daughter the entire time is just trying to say like, hey, we need to do something about this, something needs to be done, and then eventually when that happens, it's too late. Christy's taken over. They call back the housekeeper instead of an actual like demonologist for some reason.
Yeah.
She helps them, and then it all comes full circle, and then you kind of realize that you can't get rid of a demon because it comes back and kills them. I feel like it's pretty good for the most part. Steals Hunter away, and then it's a good setup for another installment, even though those installments aren't done good.
Yeah, the fourth one carries on from the third, and I wish they executed that better, but yeah. And I get what you're saying about how everyone kind of dealt with the demon in a different way, and it's kind of what they did in the first one too. Like Mika didn't take it seriously. He was just, making a joke out of it, trying to provoke it more, get some more action so he can record it. And Katie was meanwhile trying to take it seriously and like fix the problem at hand. Granted, there was only 2 major characters in the first one, so there wasn't as many differing approaches, I guess. But they still had that in the first one, which I guess we'll get right into. It's my number 1, obviously. I haven't mentioned it yet for me. And I feel like it's just... The reason why it ranks so high for me is because it was the first one to do it well. And like, Oren Peli as the director, working with such a small budget and producing what he did, I feel like was just... Like, it was done... not to perfection, but like pretty damn near. And because it just, I remember the first time watching it when it like was released in theaters or whatever, I was like on the edge of my seat. I wasn't big into horror at the time or anything like that, and just watching that movie, like, it made me feel in like high tension for the whole film, and I was on the edge of my seat, like waiting for the next thing to happen in anticipation, like just anxiety through the roof, It just made me feel all these crazy things that up to this point in my life I would never really seen in movies.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it for that. I guess it's kind of similar with you in Paranormal Activity 2, how it has that sentimental aspect to it. It's similar to the first one for me because it was the first one that I watched. I didn't see I kind of watched them in order 1, 2, 3. I didn't watch anything after that. Well, I watched the fourth one much later on, but after that I didn't watch any of them. But for the first one, like, for what they had to work with, I just think it was done amazingly well, that's all.
Yeah, no, it was definitely done, and it, especially being in theater and everybody talking about it, everyone was basically scared going into the theater, like, oh, this is the scariest movie ever.
And that was due to the marketing involved around it, and I think that was done to perfection.
Oh yeah,
the marketing, they couldn't have done it better. Like, that's what made it a mainstream thing in the horror genre, and actually even helped form or like cement the found footage genre and made it skyrocket and have so many copycats follow
basically revived the whole genre for sure.
Exactly. So that gives it credits in my books as well as to why it's my number 1, just because of the impact it had on the horror genre.
Yeah. And as for my number 1, it's definitely a hot take for sure. My number 1 is Next of Kin.
Yeah.
I feel like, obviously, it's not a Paranormal Activity movie. We're just going to get that out of the way. But I feel like it does a lot of things right that a lot of people either ignore or don't care about. Remove the title Paranormal Activity from it, and I think it's a really solid movie, honestly.
Yeah.
For the most part, it has a lot of really good setup, really good payoff. The characters are done fairly well. Obviously, the best comedic relief in this franchise.
Yeah.
The villain was super stupid, but the whole entire last 25 minutes were super stupid in the way that everything goes to shit. Everyone's killing each other.
Yeah, it was just a mess.
It was a beautiful, beautiful mess, and I loved every second in the last little bit. Especially like even just the tension going down into the tunnels. It reminded me of like Marble Hornets, just where you get a little bit closer each episode, but nothing really gets resolved until like the very end. For Marble Hornets, not really, but for this, it was resolved at the very end.
Yeah.
And everything just kind of came together. You were scared shitless because this monster was chasing you. It looked great for the most part. There was a few cheeky things like the slow-mo death scene.
Yeah, I hated the slow-mo.
Yeah, we never really mentioned that.
We didn't talk about it in our episode, but yeah, I hated when it cut to the slow motion.
But yeah, it could be a little bit of bias because I watched this directly after I watched 6, like a couple of hours later, and I love this movie so much more.
Yeah, and it's probably a similar effect to me in marked ones, honestly, with number 4.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, honestly, I'd be very surprised if people are upset with me putting this in number 1. But
you would be?
Other people would definitely be upset with me putting this
I
one
wouldn't
number
be
1.
surprised if they did. But yeah, I up to this point, like, I realized you hadn't said Next of Kin yet, and I'm like, wow, that's his number 1.
Yeah.
That shocks me for sure.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, that is a hot take. And there might have been a couple hot takes in this video, like even with me putting 4 as the lowest instead of 6. That's less controversial for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Than Next of Kin.
Yeah.
Especially because Next of Kin is, like you mentioned, it's barely even a Paranormal Activity movie. But yeah, I mean, I said my piece on Next of Kin already. I don't need to go into any more details on that.
Yeah.
Overall, how do you think about this franchise as a whole, I guess?
As a whole, there's so many movies that are skippable. So for instance, in my opinion, I would say watch the first 3, but honestly, if you watched one of them, that's fine.
Exactly.
I'd say probably, like, at the same time, the marked ones is ranked 5th on my list. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily skippable.
No.
I just like 1, 2, 3 overall as movies, but they're also similar. So in fact, I'd recommend to watch one of 1, 2, or 3, and then the marked ones. Doesn't matter which one, just because you'll get the same effect from 1, 2, or 3. I'd recommend either one of those. I'd say probably all 3. Still 1, 2, 3, the marked ones, and Next of Kin. You can skip 4 and 6 for sure.
Oh yeah, and for me, I would have been perfectly happy with it being a trilogy.
Oh yeah.
1, 2, 3, leave it at that. All 3 of them are very similar in tone, but because it's only a trilogy, they're all super connected. They're all kind of like one continuous timeline, I guess. That's fine for a trilogy.
Yeah, they're a beat backwards.
For a 7-movie franchise, however, you can't have so much repetition and expect me to love it.
Yeah, that's
for
fair.
me. I think out of every franchise we've looked at so far, this one's been my least exciting one.
I'm just trying to think of the other ones.
We've looked at Scream, we've looked at Conjuring, we've looked at Saw, Halloween. Am I missing something? I think that might be it.
I think that might be it. Yeah, I could say this is the least thrilling one for sure.
Just because of all the repetition.
Yeah.
Like, I love the first one. I talked about how much I loved it when I first saw it, and I still think it's rewatchable, even though it's kind of, you know what to expect. But after that, it's just kind of more of the same thing, which if I'm watching a whole franchise, I would like some more changes going on than what they had, I guess.
And like, you can see how much I sarcastically like this franchise, because my favorite movie is one that was like berated by critics like last year.
Yeah.
So I mean, take it or leave it. Obviously, don't take my word for heart, because my word changes is a lot more different than other people's for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's still worth watching the franchise. Like, I'm not mad that I watched it. I'm kind of glad that I watched it, actually, because I hadn't watched all of the franchise up to this point, so I'm glad we did. I'm glad it was suggested to us from Hector, and we got to take a look at it. And yeah, now I can say I've seen it all.
Yep.
So I think we summed up our thoughts on the franchise pretty well. Like, we covered it not in super great detail, but if you want to see more of our thoughts on any of the movies we talked about, we've done an episode for every single one of them, so go back and watch those if you want. I guess it's worth noting tomorrow at 4 p.m. Did we
4
say?
p.m.
4 p.m. Central Standard Time. I don't know what that is in the rest of the world, but for us, we're starting at 4 p.m. We're going to do a live stream we're putting a bunch of horror villains up against each other in a, I guess, March Madness tournament style bracket.
Yeah.
To see who would win against each other. We're doing 2 brackets. So we're doing one where it's kind of like human or human-ish villains against each other. I guess mortals, you'd call them.
Yeah.
So mortals is in one bracket, and supernatural entities or immortal creatures, however you want to call it, are going to be in the bracket against each other in there. So if you want to check that out on our live stream tomorrow, again, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, you should definitely join us. We'd love to see you guys there. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in. This is us saying cheers to fears.